The champagne glass was still cold in my hand when I read the comment. Half is mine. Legally. It sat there, bold and smug, under the photo she posted from our terrace. The one with the skyline view, my company's logo blurred just enough to look like a flex instead of a lawsuit. It was supposed to be a celebration. The IPO had gone live at 9:30 a.m. By 9:42, it had already rocketed past projections. By lunch, reporters were calling me the quiet rocket man of logistics tech. That afternoon, Forbes published a cover. My face. Our name. The valuation. $2.4 billion. I built it from a storage unit. No funding. No press. Just 22 years of never asking for applause. And there she was, holding a flute of my reserve champagne in her freshly done nails, posting, couldn't be prouder, as if she'd ever spent a night packing orders in that freezing concrete box with no heat. At the dinner that evening, she laughed too loud, leaned into a circle of her new friends, all surgically filtered and lawyer-linked, and joked, once Series D closes, I'm buying that island in St. Vincent. I've earned it. That was her new favorite phrase. I've earned it. Funny how she never said that when I was eating canned beans in the back of a truck because we couldn't afford rent. She didn't post selfies then. She didn't smile about partnership when I slept in the office with a 9mm under the desk because someone broke in the week before. But now I was a prize. A feature. A source of envy. She was parading it like a walking stock ticker with heels and highlighter. Then came the post that broke something in me. She stood on the marble balcony, the one I installed after closing our first international vendor contract, glass in hand, hips angled toward the sunset, that glinting smirk of someone who thought she already won. The caption read, built from scratch. Half is mine. Legally. I didn't comment. I didn't reply. I didn't even tell her I saw it. I just stared at it for a long time. Not out of anger. Not sadness, either. Something else. Something still and calculating. Like watching a fox walk into a trap it doesn't know you built. Quiet pride turned to quiet alarm. By the way, if you're still listening and you haven't subscribed yet, now's the moment. More than 90% of people just watch and scroll. But if you hit that subscribe button, it actually motivates our team to keep building these stories. Anyway, after she posted that, she waltzed into the bedroom and kissed my cheek like nothing had shifted. Like her digital stake in my empire was just flirtation. She flipped through property catalogs on her tablet while humming to some song she used to hate. I watched her from the doorway. She was circling listings in Kashmir. And for a woman who once helped me clean engine grease off her seats in the garage, she didn't seem to mind where the money came from anymore. Just that it flowed, uninterrupted. But here's what she didn't know. She thought she was playing house with the CEO. She didn't realize the man she married never actually worked for the company. Because the man she married didn't need a salary. He wrote the blueprints. He structured the contracts. He owned the skin beneath the skin of the company, the parts you can't see on a cap table or annual report. She wasn't stealing from a man. She was kicking a hornet's nest of clauses, mechanisms, trusts, and time bombs, thinking it was just a paper hive. And with that one comment, half is mine. Legally. She pulled a thread that had been waiting, silently, for someone just like her. I walked past the bedroom without a word. She was too busy on FaceTime, showing off the pool to some influencer who called her babe 5 times in 30 seconds. She giggled like a teenager, tossed her hair like a trophy, and didn't even notice me grab the scotch from the sideboard and disappear into the hallway. My office was the only place in the house she never bothered with. She said it was too serious. The shelves, the old filing cabinet, the locked drawer she pretended not to notice. I sat down, turned on the lamp, and pulled open the bottom drawer. Not the one with receipts or stock options or charitable crap we never claimed. No, the drawer beneath it, the one I built a false panel into, back when the company was just 3 guys and a server rack held together with duct tape and desperation. From that drawer, I lifted a plain leather-bound binder. No label, no logo, no fancy embossing, just the truth. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in years, but every page was memorized. First, the diagrams. Nested shell companies, structured with precision, branching across jurisdictions with names that sounded like Wi-Fi passwords. Then the ownership flowcharts, how the IP never technically left my name, how the algorithm patents were all licensed, not sold. The public-facing company was just a storefront. The real ownership? It was buried like a vault. Nevada trusts, offshore custodians, licensing agreements with renewal triggers no one could accidentally trip without detonating a clause or two. And the thumb drive. It looked ordinary. I'd bought it at a gas station years ago, but it held the crown jewels, time-stamped IP agreements, all signed before the company even had a receptionist. Audio memos, private contract versions, a memo from the original legal architect I'd hired, who specialized in protection-first structures for paranoid founders. He once told me, if she ever turns on you, don't fight. Just activate. I didn't even need to plug the drive in. I knew what was on it. Every agreement my wife had never seen. Every clause that would invalidate her claims if she ever tried to make them. Every time-stamped signature that proved she was never part of the ownership conversation, only the lifestyle that came after. She thought she married a builder. She didn't realize I'd stopped building years ago. After the first acquisition deal collapsed because a co-founder's ex-wife challenged the equity breakdown, I made a vow. No more clean lines. Everything would be layered, like armor. I spent 3 years and more in legal fees than she spent on handbags structuring this fortress. I became obsessed with indirection. Our tech IP, licensed to the main company, but held by a private vehicle. My name never once appeared on a payroll stub. I drew consulting fees for 2 years through a firm in Wyoming, then stopped entirely once the holding structure was complete. From the outside, I was just a charismatic founder with bad posture and a decent backstory. But behind every smiling photo, every TEDx stage, was a stack of legal time bombs designed to do one thing: outlast betrayal. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't paranoia. It was realism. I'd seen too many brilliant men shredded in court by people who once whispered, "I love you," in their ear while memorizing their login credentials. She never asked about the licensing. Never asked why I never took a W-2. She was too busy living the story. She loved being the wife of the founder. The dinners, the boards, the interviews where she got to say we and our journey and our home. The one I poured 20 years into, while she rewrote our past into a photo shoot. She saw herself as the co-architect, but she never looked at the blueprints. And now she was stepping into a war zone built on paper, clauses, and reinforced silence. Every contract she never read was a tripwire. Every post she made was a breadcrumb leading her right into them. She thought she was divorcing a husband. She was picking a fight with a ghost hidden in a dozen LLCs. And I was done pretending that wasn't exactly the plan. For years before she ever uttered the word divorce, I stood barefoot in a freezing hotel room in Reno, staring at the blinking cursor on a legal intake form. It was 2:14 a.m., my flight was delayed, and the hotel stank of stale coffee and bad decisions. I had just walked out of a tech conference where a VC panelist warned a room full of arrogant 30-somethings. The number one threat to your company isn't a competitor. It's your co-founder's girlfriend. Everyone laughed. I didn't. Because I wasn't laughing when I watched a friend lose 2 patents and a stake in his own company because of a poorly timed engagement ring and a fight that turned into an alimony circus. That night, I didn't sleep. I researched. I called a lawyer in Las Vegas who only picked up because I used the phrase Series LLC and dropped a referral name that made him sober up mid-sentence. By sunrise, I'd formed the bones of what would become my shield, a Nevada Series LLC. Each subsidiary had its own firewall. One held the original algorithm. Another held the vendor routing patent. A third, completely separate, was structured around IP licensing. None of them were in the name of the public-facing company. None were traceable in a single-step search. And every single one of them fed ownership benefits to one private trust, mine. The name everyone saw on pitch decks? The one the media loved? That was a leased identity. I designed it that way. A legally distinct, entirely public-facing shell that operated under renewable contracts and borrowed authority from the real machinery buried 5 levels down. Think of it like this. She married the showroom. I lived in the basement where the schematics were hidden. She was there for the press photo when we opened our second campus. What she didn't know was that the land wasn't owned by the company. It was owned by a private real estate LLC I'd formed with the IP trust as beneficiary. The company paid rent to the holding company, which paid dividends to a blind trust. That trust paid me a consulting stipend, technically independent of any salaried employee classification. So no, I wasn't on payroll. Never had been. And when I say licensed from me, I mean just that. Every line of code, every internal tool, every piece of vendor tech, including the AI routing model she bragged about at parties, all of it originated in a private dev repo I maintained for over a decade. Before the public company even existed, I had already filed provisional patents and structured a time-release licensing scheme. And here's the kicker. Every licensing agreement had sunset clauses, meaning if a divorce, civil dispute, or public claim occurred involving either the company or myself, the license could be revoked at will. Not canceled. Revoked, retroactively and automatically. Pending arbitration, which would be handled not in public court, but in Delaware, behind closed doors, under the authority of the original private entity. She wouldn't even be allowed in the room. That was the brilliance. The deeper you looked, the foggier it got. She could subpoena all the employee records she wanted. She'd find nothing. She could demand cap tables, employee contracts, even HR emails. I didn't live in those files. I lived outside them. I was the ghost in the infrastructure. The truth is, I never expected to have to use it. When I built it, I still believed in us. Still thought maybe she'd want the life, not the leverage. But then came the parties. The new wardrobe. The shift from how's the team doing to do we look richer than the couple next door? I watched her slowly mutate from partner to parasite. Not all at once, just 1,000 small recalibrations. 1,000 moments of what's in it for me. I kept quiet. Played the doting husband. Let her believe I was just a brilliant code monkey who got lucky. That our life was built on shared vision. That she could shout half his mind into the wind and it wouldn't come back as a summons. But in truth, every time she smiled for a photo in our home, she was standing in front of a leased wall. Every company dinner she hosted was charged to a card owned by a shell account. And every time she clicked her heels through the glass lobby like a queen surveying her court, she was stepping on floors paid for by a man who vanished from the books before the ink was dry. She thought she was sitting on the throne. She didn't see the trapdoor under her feet. She didn't call first. Didn't send a text. Didn't even leave a note on the marble counter she once made me rip out because it wasn't photogenic enough. No, she sent a process server. A smirking, overdressed 20-something who rolled up to the vineyard gate like it was a movie premiere. 2 paparazzi vans were already waiting by the road. Guess someone tipped them off. Maybe her hairstylist. Maybe her new bestie from Pilates who accidentally follows more divorce attorneys than fashion brands. Either way, the envelope came hand-delivered, thick, white, perfumed, as if she thought it should smell like victory. I watched from my upstairs office window as the gate intercom buzzed. Elena, our estate manager, picked up. I heard her clipped voice through the hallway speaker. Mr. Fenton, there's someone here with documents for you to sign. Of course there is. I walked down the long hall, opened the front door myself, and stood there in silence as the kid said, "Delivery from Mr. Thomas Fenton. You've been served." He tried to sound tough, like he was handing me a grenade. I took the packet, nodded, and closed the door. No expression, no theatrics. Then I walked straight to my office. I didn't even sit down. Just placed the envelope on the scanner bed, closed the lid, hit the button, and waited. The machine whirred, clicking frame by frame, rendering each word into digital permanence. I saved it as one file, no edits. Named the folder clause_17B_activated, and dropped the PDF inside. Then I leaned back and stared at the wall. Because here's what no one told her lawyer, and what she never bothered asking. 4 years ago, buried inside the original IP licensing contract between the core holding trust and the public-facing corporation, was a clause. Obscure, boring, tucked beneath renewal terms and arbitration procedures. Clause 17. B. Any legal or adversarial claim filed by a related party against the core license holder shall constitute immediate breach, resulting in automatic revocation of shared use privileges, data access, and internal company communications, retroactive to the date of filing. Translation? She just nuked her own access. And her attorney, with his courtroom swagger and confident espresso breath, had absolutely no clue. The irony? I warned her. Not directly, but once, during one of our late-night wine debates, back when we still spoke like partners, she'd asked what would happen if a lawsuit ever came from inside the house. I told her, jokingly, "You'd better hope it doesn't. The licensing stuff isn't friendly." She laughed. She thought I meant penalties. She didn't understand that the penalties were automated, pre-programmed, silent. That once she signed her name and submitted that filing, the system would handle the rest without me ever needing to lift a pen. No passwords, no approvals, just tripwire detonation. And now that she'd pulled the trigger, the entire security matrix, built across 5 states and 3 countries, was already adjusting. Her company logins? Flagged. Her cloud access? Scheduled for purge. Her building badge? Reclassified as inactive. Internal comms channels? Revoking permissions in real time. Even her assistant's Slack login, tied to her permissions, would be cut by midnight. It wasn't personal. It was architecture. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even call my lawyer. He already knew. We planned for this years ago. Hell, the name of the clause folder hadn't changed since I created it. It was waiting. What she filed wasn't a divorce. It was the launch code. She thought she was stepping into court for a split. She didn't know she was trespassing on a private licensing agreement, one she never read, never asked about, and never imagined could hit back harder than any prenup ever could. And the moment her signature hit the docket, everything she thought she had a claim to started slipping from her fingers, not with drama, but with dull, legal silence. The kind of silence you can't scream over. 2 days after the filing, she pulled up to the office in her white Cayenne, the same one she insisted on ordering fully spec'd so she could look the part at leadership summits she was never actually invited to. She parked in the reserved founder spot, which, of course, she wasn't listed under, and marched past the security booth without eye contact. She was wearing her statement blazer, the red one she saved for investor dinners and mock TED Talks she practiced in front of the mirror. Her heels clicked against the lobby tile like gunfire. She waved her badge at the glass doors. Nothing. No green light. No buzz. No welcome tone. Just a red flash and a quiet beep-beep like a digital shrug. She frowned and tried again. Another red flash. The receptionist, a new kid, barely 25, looked up, confused but calm. "I'm sorry, ma'am, you're not in the system." She smirked. "That's ridiculous. I'm Mrs. Fenton. This is my company." The receptionist didn't flinch. "I'm sorry. You're not listed as a visitor either. If you'd like, I can call someone to." "I don't need a damn escort," she snapped. "I helped build this place." The receptionist didn't argue, just picked up the phone and asked if facilities wanted to deal with her directly. They didn't. That was the first crack. She tried calling Chris, the VP of Ops, the same one she once asked to reconfigure the executive floor to make her side of the building more aesthetically aligned with her brand. Straight to voicemail. Next, she called her lawyer. "This is exactly the kind of intimidation tactic we expected," he said, smug. "Let them play hardball. We'll file an emergency access motion." She liked that. Emergency. It made her feel like the victim in a show she was directing. But by noon, her devices started misbehaving. First, her laptop. The moment she logged into the internal dashboard, error code. Account disabled. She tried to access archived notes. Gone. She went into Slack. Her profile had vanished, like she'd never existed. Then the cloud drive. She refreshed. Blank. Folders gone. Access revoked. The presentation she'd been working on for the upcoming Wine and Tech crossover event, replaced with a system message, access denied. User not recognized. She checked her phone. The work email she forwarded to her private inbox, blocked. All archive threads, auto-purged. She called IT directly. "Hi, this is Emily Fenton. Sorry, we can't confirm employee details without a current badge ID. I am Emily Fenton. I'm sorry, ma'am. You'll need to speak to HR." But HR already had instructions. Quiet ones. Long prepared. The moment Clause 17(b) was triggered, internal compliance tools kicked in. Access lists updated. Audit trails locked. Her credentials flagged as terminated with prejudice, an internal designation used for hostile actors or breach of contract parties. To the system, she wasn't a co-founder's wife. She was a security risk. She sat there, in the front seat of her Cayenne, fingers trembling as she refreshed her screen over and over, trying to log into something. Anything that would give her a foothold. And still, nothing. She texted her assistant, Emily Jr., because yes, she renamed her assistant Jr. as a branding joke, but the text didn't go through. Green bubble. Unregistered. Her assistant's number had been wiped from the internal phone tree. Even her email signature had vanished from recent replies. She checked the company directory online. No mention of her, not even as a board advisor. Her bio had been replaced with an empty placeholder. She was now a former contributor. She didn't understand. How could she be locked out of something she helped present, promote, smile for, wave at? She didn't know that every email she ever sent from her company address was technically routed through a third-party server under the IP licensing umbrella. She didn't know the photos on the website were under a brand usage license, and that license had lapsed the moment her legal filing was time-stamped. And she definitely didn't know that every trace of her access had been mapped, scheduled, and programmed to vanish 2 business days after trigger conditions were met. She thought she was being punished. She didn't understand this wasn't personal. This was the machine turning off a compromised terminal. And for the first time, her anger gave way to something else. Not confusion, not frustration, but fear. The kind of fear that sets in when you realize you've been trespassing on a world that was never yours. And now the walls are folding inward. Not loud, not fast, but methodically, with no exits left. 3 weeks later, she strutted into the courthouse like it was a launch party. Fresh blowout. Designer suit with matching clutch. Even her gait was different. Theatrical, purposeful. Her legal team flanked her like a presidential entourage, all dark suits and smug efficiency. The lead guy, Martin Kell, partner at a firm so overpriced they charged for the water, actually laughed when he glanced at the docket. "This'll be over in an hour," he said to one of the associates, loud enough for it to echo down the hallway. She smirked like she believed it. Her confidence was surgical. She greeted the bailiff like a regular, crossed her legs just so when she sat at the petitioner's table. She pulled out a sleek leather notepad, clicked her Mont Blanc pen, and leaned over to whisper something rehearsed to Kell, who chuckled in response. She scanned the room, clearly expecting me to arrive with some overworked solo practitioner fumbling a manila folder full of hope. But I didn't walk in late. I was already seated. Same gray suit I'd worn to the IPO reception. Same black watch. Same silence. My lawyer, Carolyn Dunn, wasn't loud. Didn't smile. Didn't shake hands. She carried only one object. A sealed navy blue envelope, standard legal size, unmarked except for a date printed in silver ink on the flap. The judge entered. Everyone rose. My wife, still legally, adjusted her collar like she was preparing for a magazine cover. The judge called the case. Fenton versus Fenton. He nodded for opening statements. Kell stood, posture perfect. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of equitable distribution. Our client was a material partner." "Material?" the judge interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Kell nodded confidently. "Of both household and company development. Our claim seeks 50% of equity acquired during the marriage, including assets derived from the recent IPO of the Fenton Enterprise Group." "Which enterprise group?" my lawyer asked quietly. Kell blinked. "The public-facing logistics firm. The one now valued at." Carolyn stood. No speech. No theatrics. She simply walked to the bench and handed over the envelope. The judge took it, opened it, and began flipping through. First, notarized trust ownership certificates, dated 7 years prior to the IPO. Second, licensing agreements between the core IP trust and the operating company, all with active renewal status and breach clauses, including 17b. Third, independent valuation audits from 2 Big Four firms, confirming the company's IP was privately held and merely leased to the entity that went public. Fourth, a flash drive. The judge slid it into a side port on his terminal, clicked a file, and up came a slideshow of social media screenshots. Every single post where she claimed ownership, staked public claim, bragged about what I helped build, and, most damning, the half is mine. Legally post. Dated. Geotagged. Captioned with hashtags linking back to the corporate brand. Kell interrupted. "Your Honor, we dispute the enforceability of that clause." "Which clause?" the judge asked without looking up. "Clause 17b, Your Honor." The judge finally paused, adjusted his glasses, and said, "The clause that voids shared access and removes benefit claims for any party who files adversarial action while using licensed assets. That clause?" Kell's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The judge clicked to the next page. A compliance memo, signed by the original license drafters, stating in plain terms, Clause 17b activates automatically upon legal filing. Assets revert. Access dissolves. And any claims made while still utilizing said assets may constitute breach, not entitlement. He turned to Kell. "You do realize this clause has precedent? It's been upheld. Federal court. Twice. You didn't think to research that." From her side of the table, she shifted, just slightly, like her spine was beginning to sense the crack forming at its base. Kell muttered something about interpretation and intent, but no one was listening anymore. Carolyn remained seated, hands folded, not even glancing at me. The envelope did all the talking. The judge flipped through the final exhibit, a copy of her notarized signature on the estate's renovation documents, which included a small clause about the IP licensing agreement as a household expenditure exception, effectively confirming she knew the brand was leased, not owned. Her initials were right there. Twice. I leaned back. Not smug. Not gloating. Just still. Because I didn't need to win. I'd already won before she filed. And now she was beginning to realize this wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a settlement. This was a quiet execution of paperwork she never understood. And every smile she'd flashed on social media was now Exhibit A in her disqualification. The judge's eyes scanned the final pages in the envelope like a man reading a story he already knew the ending to. He adjusted his glasses, leaned back slightly, and let the paper rest on the bench in front of him. The room was dead quiet, the air thick with the kind of silence that doesn't come from lack of sound, but from the slow, inevitable crash of misplaced confidence. Then he spoke, calmly, almost conversational. "Ma'am, do you understand the nature of Clause 17b? She blinked. It was the first time in this whole performance that her smile didn't know what to do with itself. She opened her mouth slightly, then looked to Kell, her attorney. He shifted in his seat, coughed, and straightened his tie like it might give him the answer. "Your Honor," he began, "we believe that clause is unenforceable due to the nature of marital equity and joint asset accumulation. This is a divorce proceeding, not a corporate arbitration." The judge raised a single hand. Not angrily, not loudly, just enough to silence the room. "Counselor," he said slowly, "this clause has already been tested and upheld twice in federal court. In both cases, the court found that parties leveraging shared marital status to breach IP licensing protections forfeited both access and equitable claim. You did read the precedent filings, didn't you?" Kell's mouth tightened. "We interpreted them as context-specific." "Ah," the judge said, his tone now as neutral as a guillotine blade. "So you came into my court interpreting federal precedent as optional." He looked back down at the documents and flipped another page. "There's also the matter of your client's public admissions. Several of them, under her verified social media accounts, tagging licensed company branding while making claims to ownership. That matters, Counselor. That matters a great deal." She shifted in her seat again. Her hand reached up to her necklace, the gold one she'd bought after the Series C announcement. She twisted it once, twice, then stopped when she realized she was drawing attention. Her face had paled 2 shades, and the confidence she wore like perfume had evaporated into something colder. Rattle didn't even cover it. She was unraveling, quietly, internally, like a designer handbag left out in the rain. "Your Honor," she said, finally, her voice too sharp, too breathless. "Surely this isn't about a clause hidden in a contract I didn't even sign." The judge looked at her, dead on. "You signed multiple documents referencing the licensing structure, including disclosures attached to your own estate renovation filings. And you benefited financially, personally, and reputationally from those licensed assets. That matters more than you think." "I never understood the details," she muttered, grasping for pity, for leverage, for something. "That," the judge said evenly, "is not a defense." Kell tried to interject again. "We believe." The judge didn't let him finish. "This isn't a belief-based proceeding, Counselor. You're not here to debate theology. You're here to explain why your client filed a direct adversarial claim while actively benefiting from licensed assets that reverted the moment she did. I suggest you proceed very carefully." For the first time, Kell didn't respond. The courtroom, moments earlier a stage for posturing and polished bravado, had become a pressure chamber. Every second ticked louder than the last. Her eyes darted between the exhibits, the judge's face, the envelope on the bench. I could see it finally registering. Not the legal mechanics. Those were still fogged to her. No, what registered was simpler, sharper. Control was gone. The narrative, the one where she was half owner, half victim, half of everything, had collapsed under the one thing she never took seriously: structure. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I just watched her lose altitude. She had walked into the courthouse to divide an empire, and was now realizing, painfully, publicly, that she had never been in it. Only around it. Only near enough to borrow the glow, but never once allowed to hold the torch. And in that courtroom, with every word from the judge stripping her claims down to exposed nerves, she was learning the same lesson every entitled pretender eventually does. There is no crown for someone who never touched the throne. It took less than 90 minutes for her confidence to die. Now, with the judge's patience thinning and the documents doing all the damage, Kell did what cornered attorneys always do when the law stops playing nice. He pivoted to venom. "We assert," he began, his voice now sharper, more animated, "that the respondent intentionally engaged in deceptive structuring. That the company's web of shell entities, trusts, and offloaded assets was built with the express purpose of denying our client her rightful share. This was not business strategy. This was marital manipulation. It borders on fraud." He said the word fraud like it was a grenade, tossed across the courtroom with the desperate hope it might explode into sympathy. Carolyn didn't even blink. She reached into her leather case. No zippers, no buckles, just a quiet magnetic snap, and pulled out one final folder. No theatrics. Just a calm slide across the table to the bench. The judge opened it. Read. Stopped. Read again. And that was when everything ended. Because what Kel, and more importantly, what she, had forgotten about in their scramble to paint me as the silent villain was this. The prenup. Signed. Acknowledged. And dated 3 years before the company even had a product, let alone a valuation. It was all there. Clean. Clear. Witnessed. Notarized. The pre-marriage financial disclosure was exhaustive, down to the last dollar in my brokerage account and the IP applications I filed when I was still writing code in my parents' basement. She had signed it all, smiling, drunk on love, probably thinking she was doing me a favor. And now, it was the guillotine she handed me years ago, blade polished, mechanism oiled, trigger cocked. The judge turned the page, then looked up at Kel with all the compassion of a man checking a box. Unless you're alleging forgery, this document precludes nearly all of your client's claims. It outlines the license structure. It identifies the trust beneficiaries. It even lists the entity names, some of which you just accused the respondent of hiding. If she didn't understand them, she should have asked. Kel sat back, silent. His hands clenched the table like a man trying not to vomit. She stood. Her chair scraped violently against the polished floor. Her fingers trembled as she pointed across the room, at me. You think you'll walk away untouched? She hissed, voice low and guttural. You think you'll just disappear with everything we built like I was never there? I didn't answer, just looked at her. That same flat, unreadable gaze I'd mastered in the boardroom. The one that says you've already lost. I just haven't told you where yet. Because there was nothing left to say, nothing worth responding to. She wasn't arguing over fairness anymore. She was flailing in a courtroom she thought was hers, only to discover every inch of it had been surveyed, mapped, and mined by me years before she even understood what Series LLC meant. Her anger wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the humiliation. She thought she was clever, thought she could post little jabs online, file with cameras watching, saunter into court with a $600 haircut, and leave with a check. Instead, she was bleeding, not from wounds she could see, but from every contract she never read, every clause she shrugged off, every early conversation she dismissed as boring founder stuff. She looked at me like she didn't recognize the man she married. And maybe she didn't, because the man she married gave her luxury, security, spotlight. But the man in front of her now? He was the architect of her silence. And he wasn't reaching for a rope. He was watching her sink, because she chose the tide. Weeks bled into each other like spilled ink. She didn't post for the first 3 days after court, probably waiting for some miracle motion or legal screw-up that would throw the whole case back into chaos and give her the win she thought she deserved. But it didn't come. Nothing did. And silence, for a woman who curated her life like a luxury catalog, was the loudest verdict of all. On the 4th day, the pity campaign began. Her Instagram reawakened, not with champagne clinks or branded bathrobe photos, but with vague captions over moody selfies. Some things aren't fair, but karma always finds its path. A candle, a glass of wine, the carefully chosen lighting of someone trying to look strong in the storm. She posted a photo of herself wrapped in a throw blanket on a patio chair, resetting, refocusing, reclaiming. But no one cared. The comments weren't what she expected. No sisterhood. No army of angry friends. Just silence. Or worse, curiosity masked as kindness. Wait, didn't you say the company was yours too? Didn't he build that alone? Why did your lawyer drop the case? Because he had. Officially. I got the notice by email. Counsel for petitioner has filed withdrawal of representation due to irreconcilable direction conflict. Translation? Even Kel knew the ship was sinking and he wasn't being paid enough to go down with it. She tried to reach out to investors, names she'd bragged about knowing, dinners she'd organized, founders she once called our inner circle. Nobody took her calls. One even texted me directly. She's reaching. Should we be concerned? I told him no. There was nothing left to be concerned about. Her fallback plan, if she ever had one, was built on borrowed shine. Her value was proximity, and now that proximity had evaporated. No one wants to bet on a person whose last headline involved a judge laughing in court and legal clauses that erased their credibility. She tried hosting a private brunch to reset the narrative, bought out a rooftop cafe, invited a dozen women from the wellness and crypto circle she dabbled in. Only 3 showed up. 1 left after 10 minutes. The other 2 stayed long enough to post a selfie, then tagged a completely different location in their stories. Optics matter. Behind the scenes, it got uglier. The accountant she used to optimize her private spending started asking questions. Apparently, the transfers she made from certain shared accounts to marketing ventures were red flagged after the case went public. Her tax filings were flagged. An inquiry started. Not criminal, not yet, but enough to send warning letters. Enough to freeze one of her liquidity lines. She tried returning to the vineyard. The gates didn't open. Because the vineyard was under a trust. The same trust that she'd signed off on 5 years ago in exchange for early access to a legacy asset, as she called it at the time. She'd traded her long-term rights for short-term lifestyle. And now that lifestyle was gone. The house, not hers, leased through a holding company as a temporary asset of rotating occupancy, with a clause that gave the holding entity the right to repurpose or reclaim the property at the end of any fiscal quarter. That quarter had ended. She came home one afternoon to find movers wrapping the furniture. Not with malice, just protocol. The new tenant, a junior exec from one of my partner firms, relocating temporarily. The lease had already transferred. She tried to argue with the foreman. He showed her the paperwork. She wasn't listed anywhere. She made one last post after that. No photos. No tags. Just black text on a white background. Be careful who you build with. They might bury you under the foundation. I didn't reply. Neither did anyone else. She didn't get messages of support. She got screenshots. The kind of screenshots that people whisper about at dinners, pass around in group chats, dissect in side comments. She was no longer a lifestyle icon. She was a cautionary tale. And the worst part? She still didn't understand that the empire she thought she was owed, the one she posed in, the one she hashtagged, the one she toasted in flutes she never paid for, was never built for her. It was built around her, designed to look inclusive, until the moment it wasn't. And now, all that was left of her kingdom was the sound of silence from the same people who once asked for favors, invitations, sponsorships. Silence, and a file folder full of screenshots that she couldn't cache. She looked nothing like the woman who walked into that first hearing. The blowouts were gone. The nails chipped. The designer blazer had been traded for a gray cardigan that hung off her like surrender. Her eyes were bloodshot. Not from crying. No, she was too proud to show that. But from sheer exhaustion. Legal fatigue. Public silence. Private collapse. The gallery was half empty now. No press. No brunch girls in sunglasses pretending to be emotionally supportive. Just her new court-appointed attorney, a kid who looked like he passed the bar 6 minutes ago, and me, sitting exactly where I always had. Second row. Same posture. Same expression. The judge entered like he had something better to do, which he probably did. He glanced down at the stack of closing documents Carolyn had submitted last week, a final compilation of ownership structures, valuations, and revised clauses triggered post-filing. A ribbon-bound folder with the dull elegance of quiet destruction. He opened it, scanned for a few beats, then paused, and chuckled. Not loudly, not cruelly, just a quiet, involuntary laugh, like something too absurd not to register. "Ma'am," he said, not lifting his eyes yet. "I'm reading a summary here that, quite plainly, contradicts the basis of your financial claim. It states, and I quote, 'The respondent has not at any time been salaried, contracted, or otherwise employed by the entity in question.'" She blinked slowly, lips parted. She didn't understand yet. The judge looked up now, right at her. "He doesn't work for the company." She opened her mouth to object, to protest, to say yes, but he's the founder, he's the face, the name, the empire. He continued. He owns it, privately, through multiple irrevocable vehicles. The operating entity you filed against is not the source of his wealth. It is merely a licensee. Your claim is rooted in assumed employment-based compensation. But he is not, and has never been, an employee. Her lawyer, or whatever discount replacement she could afford after Kel walked, dropped his pen. It rolled off the desk and hit the floor. No one bent to pick it up. She sat there, still, as if she'd stopped breathing just to delay the moment the words fully hit. Because this wasn't just a loss. This was erasure. It meant the division of marital assets didn't include the company. It meant she had no claim to equity, no grounds to sue, no leverage for settlement, no public image to threaten anymore. Everything she'd paraded online, every post, every glass of wine, every "we built this together" caption, had been a borrowed costume worn at someone else's masquerade. And now the host had turned the lights on. I stood. No smile. No words. Just one small adjustment to my jacket sleeve, and a nod to Carolyn, who didn't even bother packing up yet. She knew I wouldn't be coming back. The door creaked faintly as I walked out. Not dramatically, Just enough for her to hear the final sound of me leaving. She didn't look at me. She didn't call after me. She just stared ahead, eyes glazed, lips tightening into a line so flat it could have been a scar. She had wanted a show. A war. A spectacle. What she got was a clean deletion. No fireworks. No headlines. Just a legal record. One she'll never be able to rewrite, erase, or reframe. Because when she made it public, she assumed the story would follow her script. But I wasn't acting. I was executing. And now? Now it's permanent.